quiet streets of Wichita. Wichita was a city shaped by long roads, quiet neighborhoods, and simple daily routines. In the early 1970s, life moved slowly. People trusted each other. Children played in yards until the sky turned orange. Porch lights glowed softly at night. The city felt peaceful, protected by its sense of routine and familiarity. But beneath the calm, something silent had already begun to grow. Something that no one could see or feel yet. Something waiting for the right moment to step into the world. In January of 1974, the Otero family lived on a corner lot on East 13th Street. Their home was small but warm, a place filled with the routines of school mornings, shared meals, and family conversations. The father worked hard, the mother cared for the home, and the children followed their usual schedules. They were not rich or well known. They were simply a normal family, living a simple life. That was why the tragedy that struck them shocked the community so deeply. No one expected anything terrible to happen to a family like theirs. No one expected evil to walk so quietly into a home that looked just like every other house in the neighborhood. On that cold January morning, the city woke up to the sound of wind pushing through bare trees. Frost clung to the windows of cars parked along the streets. Neighbors prepared for another day of work and school. But inside the Otero home, something unspeakable had already taken place. When the crime was discovered, police officers stood silently outside the house, their breath turning to mist in the winter air. They did not immediately share what they had seen. They only exchanged heavy looks with one another because the scene told them something important. This crime was not random, it was deliberate. It was planned. And the person responsible was calm enough to carry it out with patience and control. News spread quickly through Wichita. People tried to understand what had happened, but the details were too unsettling for most to accept. The idea that such violence could appear suddenly, with no warning, in a quiet neighborhood, changed the way people looked at their surroundings. Doors that had always been left unlocked were now checked twice. Curtains that had been left open were now pulled shut at night. People walked their children to school instead of letting them go alone. A quiet fear lingered, soft but persistent, touching nearly every home in the city. The killer watched this reaction with interest. He had not chosen the Otero family at random. He had studied them. He had observed the house, the routines, the times when family members left and returned. He understood how the home functioned, and he liked the feeling of control this knowledge gave him. He believed that planning and patience made him smarter than the people around him. He walked among the residents of Wichita as if he were invisible, blending into the rhythm of the city while hiding his intentions beneath an ordinary appearance. Days passed, then weeks. Eventually, the immediate shock faded, but the fear remained. Police officers worked long hours, searching for any clue that could reveal who had done this. They followed leads, interviewed neighbors, reviewed evidence, but nothing pointed to a clear suspect. Whoever had committed the crime had moved with precision. He had left little behind. And even though officers worked with determination, they could not find a path forward. The killer, however, was not finished. He waited quietly, watching how the city responded. He followed news reports. He read the papers. He listened to conversations. He enjoyed knowing something the rest of Wichita did not. He enjoyed feeling as though he had outsmarted everyone. That feeling, more than anything else, pushed him forward. Over the next several months, he explored neighborhoods in a way that seemed ordinary from the outside. He drove through residential streets at night. He walked near houses where lights were still on. He studied windows. He watched people. He learned their schedules, their habits, their weaknesses. He did this with no expression on his face, as if he was simply going for a drive or taking an evening walk. He moved with patience, never rushing, always observing. In April of 1974, he chose another target. Her name was Catherine Bright. She lived with her brother, who was away much of the day. She attended classes. She worked. Her life was ordinary. The killer liked ordinary victims because they blended into the city so easily, unnoticed by most people except those who knew them personally. This made it easier for him to study them without drawing attention. On the day of the attack, Catherine returned home unaware of what waited inside. Her brother arrived unexpectedly and confronted the intruder. A struggle followed. The crime was not as smooth as the killer had planned. The brother survived, though seriously injured, and would later describe the attacker as calm, controlled, and determined. The attacker moved quickly and silently, without anger or hesitation. That detail unsettled investigators more than anything else. Most violent criminals acted out of rage or emotion. This one behaved like someone completing a task. After this incident, Wichita no longer felt the same. The city was still quiet, still calm, still filled with the same houses and streets. But the feeling had changed. People noticed unfamiliar cars driving slowly through neighborhoods. They stared a little longer at strangers walking past their homes. They kept lights on at night. Wichita was learning to live with fear, a fear that came not from loud danger, but from something silent and patient. The killer understood that fear. He liked it. He fed on it. He studied it. And he decided to make himself known. Not by revealing his identity, but by leaving clues. He began sending letters to local newspapers and law enforcement. He described what he had done, the feelings he experienced, and the steps he took. He explained how he chose his victims. He wrote with calm detail, using proper grammar, structured sentences, and a steady tone. The letters did not sound like the words of someone losing control. They sounded like someone fully aware of himself, someone who believed he was smarter than everyone around him. In these letters, he referred to himself with 3 letters, BTK. He wrote that these letters described what he did: bind, torture, kill. The simplicity of the name shocked the community. It was not dramatic or emotional. It was clinical. It was cold. It suggested that the crimes were not accidents or impulses. They were planned steps in a routine that the killer followed with precision. Investigators read each letter carefully, searching for clues that might reveal who he was. They studied the handwriting, the vocabulary, the tone. They considered the possibility that BTK was someone educated, someone with a stable job, someone who understood how police investigations worked. They knew he was hiding in plain sight. They just did not know where to look. Meanwhile, BTK continued living his ordinary life. He went to work. He spent time with his family. He attended church. He performed normal tasks in normal places. People spoke to him without realizing who he was. He smiled at neighbors. He maintained a calm public image. And all the while, he watched the investigation unfold, confident that he was still several steps ahead. Years passed. Wichita changed slowly. New families moved into old homes. Children grew up. Streets became busier. But the memory of BTK never fully faded. People spoke about him quietly, as if saying his name too loudly might draw him back. Some nights, residents swore they heard footsteps outside their homes, though they knew it was probably only the wind. Other nights, they double-checked their locks even when they felt safe. The killer had become a shadow in the collective memory of the city. BTK watched all of it. He liked long gaps between his crimes. The distance made him feel even more in control. It made people think he had disappeared. It allowed him to watch the fear rise and fall like a tide. And most importantly, it gave him time to plan. The story of BTK did not end in the 1970s. It would continue for decades, crossing into a new century. But in these early years, Wichita learned a difficult truth. Evil does not always appear with noise or warning. Sometimes it moves quietly through ordinary neighborhoods. Sometimes it wears the face of a polite neighbor, a helpful co-worker, a member of a local church. Sometimes it walks among everyone without being noticed. This was only the beginning, the long silence. After the violent events of 1974, the city of Wichita tried to settle into a fragile sense of normal life. People returned to work. Schools reopened their doors. Families gathered for meals at the same tables where they had always sat. But the feeling in the air had changed forever. Conversations that once held simple topics now carried an edge of caution. People whispered about safety, about locked doors, and about a killer no one could see. Wichita was not a city used to fear, but fear had arrived, and it refused to leave. The police department worked day and night, searching through every possible lead. Officers questioned neighbors, store clerks, co-workers, and anyone who might have seen something unusual. They compared similar cases across Kansas, hoping to find a pattern. Investigators reviewed every piece of evidence from the Otero home and from the Bright case. They searched for fingerprints, shoe prints, fibers, anything that could point to someone. But every piece of information seemed to fade into nothing. The killer was careful, patient, and methodical. Each time the police thought they were getting closer, the trail disappeared. BTK watched their efforts with interest. He read the newspapers every morning, looking for updates on the investigation. He listened to radio broadcasts, waiting for reporters to mention anything new. He paid attention to the community meetings held about safety. He studied the fear of the city as if it were a subject he was researching. The fear pleased him. It made him feel powerful. It made him feel noticed, even though no one knew who he was. Months turned into a year, then two. The early shock softened into a quieter, heavier anxiety. People still talked about BTK, but now they did it with tired voices, frustrated by the lack of answers. Some believed the killer had left Wichita. Others believed he had died or been arrested for some unrelated crime. A few believed he was still here, living among them. Those few were correct, but there was no way to know it with certainty. While the city waited for answers, BTK lived his life with steady routine. He continued to work at his job. He supported his family. He attended church every Sunday. He visited local stores and walked through familiar neighborhoods. He looked like anyone else. He talked like anyone else. He behaved like anyone else. No one suspected him because he did nothing outwardly unusual. His normal life was the perfect camouflage. During these years, he continued studying potential victims. He drove through neighborhoods late at night. He took note of houses where the curtains were always open, where windows were left unlocked, where the same patterns repeated day after day. His mind worked quietly, always analyzing, always planning, yet he did not always act. Many times he walked away from a house without doing anything. He believed that patience made him powerful. He believed that waiting gave him control. In March 1977, BTK chose his next victim. Her name was Shirley Vian. She lived with her children in a small home on a residential street. She was young, raising her family with quiet strength. She had no connection to the previous victims. She did not know anyone involved in the earlier cases. Like the others, she was chosen because she fit his pattern. She appeared ordinary. Her home followed a predictable routine, and she lived in a neighborhood where people trusted each other. On the afternoon of the crime, the children were playing when the killer forced his way inside. The scene was chaotic. The children were locked in a bathroom for safety. Shirley was taken into another room. The crime was quick but precise. Moments after it ended, BTK left the house without rushing. He walked calmly to his car and drove away, as if running errands. The children escaped the bathroom and found their mother. Their terrified screams reached the neighbors, who ran to help and called the police. This crime hit Wichita harder than the earlier ones. The presence of children in the home changed the emotional tone of the case. People who had tolerated the earlier fear now felt something deeper. They felt violated. They felt unprepared. They felt as though danger could appear anywhere, at any time. The city no longer believed that careful behavior could protect them. BTK had shown that he could strike even during daylight hours, and even when others were nearby. The police response intensified. Officers investigated every man who lived or worked within miles of the crime scene. They collected statements from neighbors and family members. They checked vehicle records. They examined footprints and door frames. But again, nothing led anywhere. BTK had left without leaving a clear trace. 3 months later, in December of 1977, BTK attacked again. This time, the victim was Nancy Fox, a 25-year-old woman who lived alone. She worked 2 jobs, one at a jewelry store and another at a clothing shop. Her days were long and predictable. Her home was quiet, a small space with simple furniture and warm lighting. She kept to herself and lived a calm life. The night she became a target, neighbors reported nothing unusual. They heard no screams, no crashing, no sign of disturbance. The killer moved carefully and silently, doing what he had planned with the same steady calm he had shown before. He left the home without attracting any attention. The next morning, when Nancy did not appear for work, her co-workers became worried. A manager went to her home to check on her and discovered the crime scene. They called the police immediately. This time, BTK did something different. He called the police himself to report the crime. The voice on the phone was low, controlled, and unemotional. He stated the address and the name of the victim, then hung up. The officer taking the call felt a cold silence settle over the room. The tone of the caller had been frightening, not because of anger or noise, but because of the lack of emotion. It was the voice of someone describing a simple fact, nothing more. This phone call changed everything. The city understood that the killer was watching closely. He was following the investigation. He wanted attention. He wanted to guide the story. His calm confidence frightened people more than his actions. They understood he did not fear being caught. He enjoyed the game. Detectives analyzed the phone call carefully. They played it repeatedly, searching for background noise, regional accent clues, or signs of stress. They found none. The voice sounded like that of a man who was in complete control of himself. It was a voice that could have belonged to any number of men in Wichita. In the following days, fear settled once again over the city. People began to avoid walking alone at night. Parents kept children close. Police vehicles patrolled neighborhoods more frequently. But the killer had faded into silence again. The cycle repeated itself. The crime happened. The city reacted. The police investigated intensely. And then everything went quiet. The next year passed with no new attacks. Residents began to hope that the killer had finally stopped, or that he had moved away, or that he had been arrested for something else. But the police did not share that hope. They knew BTK was patient. They knew he liked long breaks. They knew he enjoyed watching the city slowly relax, only to strike again when least expected. BTK watched the news, read articles about the fear he caused, and felt a sense of power. He believed he controlled the mood of the entire city. He believed his actions shaped the behavior of thousands of people. He felt that he had become an invisible presence, an unseen force that guided the emotions of Wichita. His confidence grew with each passing month, and he was not finished. The long game. The 1980s arrived in Wichita with its quiet streets and everyday routines. Families went to work, children walked to school, and neighbors greeted each other with polite nods. On the surface, everything seemed ordinary. But beneath the calm, the memory of BTK lingered like a shadow. People who had lived through the 70s remembered the fear, and even new residents could feel the weight of the stories. The city had not forgotten the carefully planned attacks, the letters to the police, and the cold precision of the man who had moved among them. BTK himself continued his routine. He worked at the same job, attended church regularly, and engaged with his community. Neighbors would wave to him, share small talk, and trust him completely. To anyone looking in, he was normal. To him, that normality was essential. He liked being invisible, blending in, and observing without being noticed. He knew that the longer he could hide, the more control he had. During this decade, he did not commit any known attacks. He remained patient, watching, learning, and refining his methods. He read newspapers for information on the investigation, noting any mistakes or missteps by the police. He studied the habits of people in the city, paying close attention to routines and patterns. Each day, he observed the world around him. He reinforced the idea that he could act at any time and disappear without leaving a trace. Then, in 1986, a breakthrough in his pattern occurred. BTK selected his next victim, a young woman living alone in a modest home in Wichita. She had recently moved from another city, knew few neighbors, and had an established routine that made her predictable. He observed her over weeks, learning when she left for work, when she returned home, and when the house was empty. The attention to detail gave him confidence. He knew the attack would be precise, controlled, and untraceable if executed correctly. On the day of the crime, the woman returned from work as usual. The streets were quiet, the wind soft. No one noticed the stranger walking along the sidewalk, a man moving calmly, deliberately, without drawing attention. He entered her home unnoticed, carried out the attack, and left without leaving evidence. The woman was found by a co-worker the next morning. As usual, BTK had managed to disappear before anyone knew he had been there. After the attack, he did something that had become a pattern. He sent a letter to the police. The letter described the crime in detail, calmly explaining how he had entered the home, what he had done, and how he had left. The tone was emotionless, almost clinical. It was a method of asserting control over the city and over the investigation. The police read each word carefully, searching for clues. Each letter reinforced the idea that BTK was meticulous, intelligent, and patient. The city reacted once again. Parents walked their children to school. Neighbors locked doors and windows, even when they felt safe. Business owners stayed alert. Wichita had learned that calm could be deceptive, that routine could hide danger, that the quietest streets could hold the most fear, and all the while, BTK watched. He observed the reactions with satisfaction, knowing he influenced the behavior of thousands without ever being seen. Years passed, and the crimes continued sporadically. Each time BTK struck, the city's reaction followed a predictable pattern. Fear spread slowly, people adjusted their routines, and the police intensified their investigations. Then months or years would pass with no attacks, allowing the city to relax again. This cycle repeated itself over and over. Each crime, each letter, each period of silence reinforced his control and his confidence. By the 1990s, BTK had become almost a legend in Wichita. Parents told their children stories to keep them safe. Neighbors remained alert and suspicious. Local media continued to report on the killer's history, and occasional letters kept the story alive. The city had learned to live with the knowledge that a dangerous man was among them, invisible yet ever present. BTK himself had changed little. He continued to maintain the appearance of a normal citizen, attending church, working his job, and participating in community activities. He smiled at neighbors, helped with small tasks, and appeared entirely harmless. But inside, he carried the knowledge of every attack, every letter, and every fear he had caused. That knowledge gave him a sense of power. He believed he could act again at any time, and that no one would notice. In 1991, BTK attacked again. His victim was a woman living in a quiet residential area, a young mother whose husband worked nights. The attack was precise and methodical, carried out in a manner consistent with his previous crimes. The police responded quickly, but as always, they had no evidence to link the attack to a specific suspect. BTK had once more vanished into the ordinary streets of Wichita, leaving behind only fear and questions. Each crime added to the city's collective memory. People remembered the fear of the first attacks, the precision of the letters, and the calmness of the man responsible. They spoke quietly, often in hushed tones, of the invisible presence that had changed the way they lived. And yet, life went on. Children grew up, neighborhoods changed, and daily routines continued. But the memory of BTK remained embedded in the city's consciousness. Through all of this, BTK's patience never faltered. He understood that fear could be maintained without constant action. He knew that by striking occasionally and sending letters, he could continue to influence the city and the investigation without exposing himself. He had learned that invisibility, combined with control, created more power than violence alone. The city of Wichita lived in a state of cautious normalcy. Its residents continued their routines, aware of the hidden danger. Each quiet street, each dimly lit porch, each peaceful night was a reminder that the killer could appear anywhere, at any time. And BTK watched, content in the knowledge that the quiet streets and ordinary faces hid a truth that only he fully understood. And though decades passed, he continued his work in secret, patient, precise, and unobserved. The Long Shadow. By the late 1990s, Wichita had grown in population and the neighborhoods had changed somewhat. But the presence of BTK remained. He had become part of the city's shadow, a quiet reminder that even the most ordinary people could harbor extraordinary darkness. Residents continued with their routines, but there was an unspoken caution in their movements. Children were watched more closely. Doors and windows were checked repeatedly. Strangers were observed with suspicion. The memory of the killer shaped the behavior of thousands without him ever revealing himself. BTK himself remained unchanged outwardly. He attended church, spent time with his family, and performed the tasks of daily life as if nothing were wrong. He smiled politely at neighbors, offered to help with small chores, and maintained the appearance of a law-abiding citizen. But he was always observing. He watched the news, monitored the police investigations, and read reports about his own crimes. Each time there was a gap in activity, he considered it a victory. He knew the city had relaxed too much, and he understood that the anticipation of his return was more powerful than his presence. During this period, BTK continued to plan meticulously. He studied routines, the habits of new families, and the layout of neighborhoods. He understood timing, the patterns of everyday life, and the psychology of fear. He had learned over decades that patience amplified his power. By waiting, he ensured that his actions would be more shocking and that his letters would be more effective. Every move was calculated, every pause deliberate. The city's collective anxiety became a canvas upon which he painted his quiet control. In the early 2000s, BTK selected a new victim. Her name was Julie. She lived alone, worked a regular job, and spent her evenings quietly. BTK observed her for weeks, noting the times she left for work, the moments when she returned home, and when her home would be empty. He recorded nothing physically, but memorized everything mentally. To him, awareness and observation were more powerful than evidence. He needed to leave no trace because traces could be discovered, and discovery could destroy him. The attack occurred one evening when the city was calm. The streets were quiet, and few people were outside. BTK entered her home, executed his crime with precise control, and left without leaving evidence. The following morning, neighbors reported unusual silence. Police arrived, investigated, and found the scene. As in previous attacks, BTK had left a letter. The letter described the crime in careful detail, written with steady hand and calm voice. It reiterated his self-given initials, BTK, and described his methodology. The letter did not display emotion or excitement. It was matter of fact. The message was clear. He was still in control. The city reacted predictably. People locked their doors, watched their surroundings more closely, and avoided being outside alone. Fear returned, not in dramatic moments, but as a quiet presence in everyday life. Families adjusted routines. Conversations were tinged with caution. The city learned, once again, that peace was fragile, and that ordinary life could be interrupted by someone completely ordinary hiding something extraordinary. Police continued to investigate. Officers analyzed handwriting, voice patterns, locations, and behavioral clues. But decades had passed, and BTK was careful. He had adapted, refined, and perfected the art of invisibility. Each crime, each letter, each period of silence reinforced his pattern. He was a patient predator, and the city unknowingly participated in his ongoing experiment in control and fear. In 2004, a small error would begin to unravel the long silence. BTK, confident after decades of evasion, sent letters using new technology, believing he could manipulate the system. He did not account for the changes in digital tracking. For the first time, investigators were able to trace a clue, something minute, hidden within an electronic document he had submitted. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone who did not know where to look, but it contained the key to identifying him. The patient predator had become slightly careless. The following year, in 2005, that small mistake led to his capture. Police were able to identify the man behind BTK as Dennis Rader, a citizen of Wichita, a husband, a father, and a member of his church. The revelation shocked the community. People could not reconcile the polite, ordinary man they knew with the decades of terror he had caused. Neighbors, co-workers, and family members were stunned. The quiet man they had trusted had hidden a dark life they could not have imagined. His ability to blend in had been complete, a perfect camouflage for decades of violence. His arrest brought relief, but also an eerie understanding. Wichita had lived in the presence of darkness without knowing it for decades. The fear that had influenced behavior, shaped daily routines, and lingered in memory had been orchestrated by someone who walked among them unnoticed. The city had survived, but the shadow of BTK remained in stories, memories, and quiet conversations. Even after his arrest, people continued to check locks, observe neighbors, and remember the long periods of fear. They had learned a difficult truth. Evil is not always loud. It can be patient, quiet, and hidden in the most ordinary places. And for decades, it had lived in Wichita as a man who smiled, attended church, and blended seamlessly into everyday life. The city had endured, but the story of BTK remained, a testament to the long shadow that one person's darkness could cast over an entire community. The end of the silence. After Dennis Rader's arrest in 2005, Wichita slowly returned to a quieter life. The streets were still the same, the houses unchanged, and the routines of daily life resumed. But the city had been forever marked by the presence of BTK. People locked their doors, watched their surroundings, and spoke more cautiously. Even decades later, the fear remained in subtle ways, a quiet reminder of what had once walked among them unnoticed. Rader's trial revealed the full extent of his crimes. The community learned the details of his attacks, the letters he had sent, and the decades of terror he had caused. People listened in disbelief, unable to reconcile the ordinary man they had seen with the violent, methodical killer described in court. His calm demeanor and careful planning had allowed him to remain undetected for over 30 years, making the city feel both relieved and unsettled at the same time. The victims' families finally received answers. Their pain, which had been prolonged by decades of uncertainty, now had some closure. The knowledge of the truth brought a mixture of relief and sorrow. The city collectively breathed easier, knowing the man who had caused so much fear and suffering would no longer be free to harm anyone else. Yet the story remained in memory, a lesson in vigilance and the hidden darkness that can exist in ordinary life. BTK was sentenced to multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. For Dennis Rader, the carefully maintained disguise of a normal life was gone. He could no longer walk freely among the streets of Wichita. The city had regained safety, but the scars of his crimes were invisible yet persistent, shaping how residents thought about their environment, their neighbors, and the routines of daily life. The legacy of BTK is one of patience, meticulous planning, and the frightening ability of a person to hide evil beneath the mask of normalcy. Wichita survived, adapted, and learned. Families continued to live, children grew up, and the city continued its quiet routines, but the shadow of the past never fully disappeared. The story of BTK became a lesson, a chilling reminder that appearances can deceive and that darkness can exist where it is least expected. Even now, years later, the quiet streets of Wichita hold the memory of fear. Residents still lock doors, still glance at shadows at night, still remember the letters and the unseen presence that shaped decades of caution. The city endured, but the story of BTK remains, whispered in conversations and remembered as one of the most chilling examples of patience, control, and hidden evil. The long silence ended not with the disappearance of fear, but with understanding. Wichita learned that ordinary life can be deceiving, that calm streets can hide danger, that people can carry secrets unimaginable to those around them. And in that understanding, there's both relief and a quiet vigilance, a reminder that the world is never quite as simple as it seems. And with the final chapters of the story told, the city of Wichita continues quietly, knowing that the darkness that once walked among them has been contained. Yet the lesson it left behind will endure forever.